Hey there everybody, my name is Kat Bowser. I'm your resident fantasy therapist and welcome back to my channel. So I wanted to talk today a little bit about types of fantasy. I actually recorded this video a little bit ago and I don't know what happened to it. I don't know if it didn't record or what, but anyway, I just wanted to talk about the different types of fantasy, and I think I might do this for the different genres as well. Just because I think they're interesting to talk about, that there's such a wide variety. I will try to hit as many as I know of, but I know I'm going to miss some. There's so many. So if you guys have your own ideas, drop them below. I want to hear your thoughts on these different types of fantasy. And if you guys like this kind of video, let me know what genre you want me to do next. So that being said, we'll just jump into it. So first and foremost, the epic/high fantasy. This is, I think, the quote-unquote traditional fantasy. This is the Quest. This is the Lord of the Rings. This is the Wheel of Time. Typically another world similar to ours, but not Earth, where you have different fantasy creatures. You have magic. You have usually some kind of global threat that the characters are going against. And I'll admit, this is my favorite. I don't know why it's my favorite, but it's my favorite. I think I love quest stories because you really get to see a lot of character development with them. You get to see the characters go through these different ordeals and grow and change from it, and I really love seeing that. Low fantasy. This one's hard because I hear so many different explanations of what low fantasy is, so it kind of depends on who you ask. My thought on it is it's a world very similar to Earth, but there's like hints of magic, but the magic isn't the center point. It's the more human interactions that are the center point. So like I would consider like A Song of Ice and Fire or Game of Thrones to be a low fantasy, because there is magic in it. And magic does play a factor, but that's not the real focus. And it's not something that is dominating the plot, so to speak. This one, it really depends on how it's written for me, honestly. Like I've told you guys before, I'm not a huge fan of A Song of Ice and Fire just because I don't like a lot of the characters. I don't think they're likable, and I think that's a problem. But I do think that having a world where there's like hints of magic, but that's not really what we're focused on. We're focused more on like the characters' personal goals or worldly goals, that kind of thing. I think that can be fun. Magic adds an interesting element to it, and I think with low fantasy, most of the time the magic isn't understood, and I think that adds a little bit of a twist to it that can be fun. Branching off on that, grimdark. Those of you who know me, I don't like this. Grimdark is essentially a fantasy where the world is very unforgiving, cruel, has an overall almost dystopian kind of vibe. And I honestly don't see the appeal. I just don't. I'm glad people enjoy it because it's obviously a thing. I mean, I think more and more stories are leaning towards it, especially after Game of Thrones. I just don't see the appeal. I like to see characters triumph and accomplish and make things better. I'm not a huge fan of the grim realism kind of vibe. For one, I really don't think that being grimdark necessarily makes a story more realistic. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this one just because I don't like it, but that doesn't mean it's a bad category. It just means I don't like it. Those of you who do, tell me why in the comments. I honestly want to know why, because I'm curious. Next one, historical fantasy. So this one kind of falls into two parts. I've seen it referred to as rewritten history, where you're essentially in a period of history, but instead of it going the way it was, there was magic involved. And there you go. But I've also seen people use it to describe books where there isn't any magic, but it takes place in like a medieval type world but it's a made up world. And I don't know. Would that be more historical fiction to you guys, or would it be historical fantasy? Let me know, because I've heard both. But anyway, I think this can be fun, because anytime that you're looking at history and you're throwing magic into the mix, it really can change things around, because magic, depending on what type you have, can really change outcomes of certain aspects. Like, I mean, if you think about if we were to go back to like World War I and suddenly we introduce mages that can fight with either or side, suddenly things are more complicated. Let's see. That falls more into horror, I think. But I'll mention it anyway, because I think it could be fantasy too. My husband loves Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. And I think it kind of treads the line between horror and paranormal fantasy. So I'll mention it here. But it throws in the idea of vampires fighting on either side of the Civil War. And I think that's fascinating. So little things like that, because magic, I think it affects things more than people think it does. But that does make, I think, historical fantasy sometimes hard to write, because you have to remember, okay, exactly how much is this going to affect things? It's like a little spider's web. Next one, portal fantasy. This is your Narnia. And I do like Narnia. This is where essentially someone goes through some kind of portal and ends up in another fantasy world. This is also like your Alice in Wonderland kind of stuff. I think it's interesting, and I think it's a great way to do a ton of world building and not have it be info dumping, because you're going to be following someone who this world is completely alien to them. So anytime they're confronted with something weird, you have an opportunity to have them figure out why. And so you also explain to your readers why. So I enjoy stories that do that. I think sometimes what I find with portal fantasy, though, that I don't understand is most of the time these people want to go back to the regular world where there's no magic, there's none of these extraordinary things. And maybe some people would be like that. Most people I talk to, though, are like, oh heck no, I'm staying in the fantasy world. So that's the only thing I think that kind of bugs me with these is just that little tidbit. And I'd kind of like to see someone run with that and see what they do with it. Urban fantasy. So this is fantasy, essentially. It takes place in modern day. This one, I go back and forth on this one, because I've read some that are really good. I've read some that I just could not get into. So I think this is where you usually have like the hidden world, the magicians and sorcerers and stuff that have to hide. The anime Wolf's Rain, the wolves that take on human forms so they don't get captured or killed, that kind of thing. So it has a lot of potential. I think for me, I just don't like modern day settings. Those of you who've been on my channel a while know I don't like contemporary fiction as a general rule. And that's one reason why I like more fantastical settings. So this one is strictly a taste thing for me. Kind of like the Grimdark. It's strictly a taste thing. I've seen some urban fantasies done exceptionally well. Well written, interesting characters, setting, all that stuff. And it's just not for me, so I can't get into it. But I do like to explore it every so often. So those of you who do like urban fantasy, feel free to drop your favorites below so I can check them out. Fairy tale retellings. I give these their own category because they can fall into any of the others, but I think that's something specific to mention. I love fairy tale retellings. I love myth retellings, because as long as you keep some core elements of the story intact, you can kind of do whatever the heck you want with it. And I love taking a familiar story and introducing an element that wasn't there before, that now suddenly changes the outcome or the way they get to the outcome. Like, for instance, My third work in progress that I'm still doing outlining on is a Hansel and Gretel retelling. And it's a Hansel and Gretel retelling of what if Hansel died from the witch's torture of him. And now his sister wants revenge for it. That's essentially that's the bare bones plot. And it kind of lets you explore a whole bunch of different things. Like, I love it when people take fairy tale retellings and they set them in a different culture, or they do something with the pairings or things like that. I always like those. So these can be done really well. They can be done really poorly. So it kind of depends on what you're working with. Okay, let's see. Like I said, I know I'm going to miss some of these. I know for a fact I'm going to miss some of these. Science fantasy. This one is, I think, an interesting blend of science fiction and fantasy. And I know some people don't like this. They say, no, there's a distinction between science fiction and fantasy. But I've seen stories that have so many elements of both that they're neither one or the other. They're literally both. And I like them. I think that introducing a world where you have technological advances, aliens, space travel, but you also have people that can do healing magic, or people that communicate via telepathy or things like that. I think those are fun. Those are fun elements to mesh together and see what happens. But again, I think this one, is really dependent on taste. Because like I said, a lot of people don't like the idea of the two being together in a genre. They want them as separate, and that's fine. I totally understand that preference. It's just not mine. I think most of the others kind of fall into this is a fantasy with romance. This is a fantasy with paranormal elements. This is a Western fantasy, So they're just, I call them like these, they're just little tents over the fantasy. Like, we're going to make this a Western fantasy, or we're going to make this a fantasy that has a romance at its center, things like that. And I think those are fun. I don't tend to have a love story at the center of my fantasies, although it might pop up here and there. Same thing, I don't tend to have like a Western fantasy. Although it might be kind of fun to do, actually. I might have to think about that. And like I said, I know I'm missing some. I know for a fact I'm not mentioning all of these. But those are all the ones that come to mind right now. So you guys let me know below which ones I missed, or which ones you think don't get a lot of focus, which ones you think are most interesting. I want to hear your thoughts on it. So thank you guys for joining me. If you liked what you saw and you want to make sure you don't miss when I upload again, make sure you subscribe and ring the bell. I will try to give you guys 3 videos this week, 2 videos next week, hopefully. And as always, if you have suggestions or comments, drop them below and I'll get to them as soon as I can. I always love answering you guys' questions or taking your guys' suggestions. And until next time, stay safe. Have a good one.